Jacksonville, the child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. Poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
The week that was on 24th of August 2019 from WBRM Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Very interesting week, as we usually say, but this one is even more interesting. We'll start with the Keystone Pipeline. For those that recall, the Keystone Pipeline runs from Canada across Montana, Nebraska, and eventually it will end up in Texas. Now, there is part of the Keystone that is already completed from Oklahoma to Galveston, Texas. However, the other part has not. The Supreme Court in Nebraska has granted the pipeline company permission to use the lands of Nebraska. So now it goes to Montana, and the judge in Montana, it has to come in through Canada. The judge in Montana has ruled against the Keystone Pipeline Company once before. So once again, there is a standoff with Keystone Pipeline, and there are some other pipelines around the country that are in jeopardy of being denied. There's a case in Minnesota where a pipeline company with a history of spills and thuggery has been held up by the process in that state. So we'll see more and more of this, and all of those cases involve Aboriginal reservations, also rivers, streams, etc., environmental impact. And we'll skip around since this is a global situation. In Brazil, under the right-wing dictator Jairus Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro has basically told small farmers and whomever else to slash and burn, light fires to the forests in the Everglades, and now he's come up against the Europeans in France and in also Ireland. They are signing to sign a trade deal, and President Macron has attached to that the situation in Brazil. So now the fascists had ordered the army out to fight fires in the Amazon after denying that they were there. So again, we see a double standard in news reporting of the same situation in the U.S. with the American economy. DJ Trump went on another Twitter tangent, telling U.S. companies, ordering U.S. companies to cease business in China as quickly as possible. He does not have the constitutional authority to do that, but there is, if he calls a national emergency, could cause some inconvenience for American companies that are doing business in China. We'll have more of this on a Numbers Man this week on WBRN and the Boston Red Network. That's our macroeconomics program. We'll talk about that. The Fed just finished meetings in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. That is annual meeting by the Kansas City Federal Reserve. We'll talk a little bit about that. But nonetheless, on our political side here, we'll stick to the politics of it. The G7 is now going on in France. DJ Trump arrived there. And from Mr. Tesh, who is the EU head there, titular head, said that this would be a very difficult situation. Usually there's the group photos of these kinds of events, and there's unanimity pretty much in thought, at least on the surface. This time there will not be the unanimity there. But the tariff regime, China has put more tariffs on U.S. products. DJ Trump responded, and the tariff game goes on. And it will end not soon. And at the same time, the market showed its displeasure by falling almost 700 points. I think it's 2.3% on Friday. So in other words, the economic doldrums go on. Anyway. So thus, what we have here is a situation where the Fed has limited tools. Their mandate is full employment and stable inflation. That is their mandate. Now, and this is where the political situation comes in here. Other central banks across Europe and, of course, Japan, they're dealing with so-called negative interest rates. What negative interest rates do to you, and we'll talk about this on Numbers Man, is they retard or basically retard. We'll say that your growth prospects, things become eventually cheaper, but also you have stagnation as far as compensation wages are concerned. Stagnation as far as growth. Japan was in this for 10 years. So, thus, there are no good solutions to the problem that is here. And we have to look beyond DJ Trump as a crisis in capitalism itself. And that is something you have to look to Senator Sanders for solutions on that. He's in the Midwest today at the Minnesota State Fair, being interviewed there and having a, I believe, town hall meeting there also. But this is a situation that will stay out here for a very long time. And normally when you have a crisis, and now this is a global crisis, and a number of nations there in the global economy are in trouble. Germany, the largest economy in Europe, they're in a recession. We've talked about that. The UK with their Brexit, which is a political created crisis more so than anything else, they will be going into recession, and we just start counting the dominoes as they fall. Now, as far as China, the decoupling from the U.S. is in the Chinese best interest in the long term. As far as the short term, yes, there would be some pain there. But the U.S. and their tech companies, particularly Apple, there will be consequences there as far as markets are concerned. Moving your manufacturing, many manufacturers have moved from China because it's more expensive there, and they moved to Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc. But actually that is not the issue here. It is a psychology of the market. Enough of that particular situation, but we thought we would bring that up. The rest of the cheat sheet here, we got Keystone out of the way, which is on the environmental front. And also there was rumors that DJ was talking to some of his cronies about if he's reelected, tackling Medicare. That will go well with seniors, no doubt about that. Thus the season goes on. We don't have really any, I believe, up-to-date polling will look. We do have Uncle Carl here, and let me get on my additional eyes to read this. He's writing, as usual, in the Wall Street Journal on the 22nd of August. The impeachment bubbles on. The Democratic impeachment train rolls on. The last movement came on Monday when the number 4 Democrat, Ben Ray Lujo, I always mispronounce, he's announced that he favors moving forward on the inquiry into the impeachment of DJ Trump. Never mind that the House has not voted. It will, as it did with Andrew Johnson and Tricky Dicky, to authorize the Judiciary Committee's impeachment investigation, nor is the House relying on the recommendation of an outside investigation as it did with Bill Clinton. Now, that was a Starr investigation. On the contrary, the House impeachment fanatics, as he called them, were disappointed earlier this year when the special counsel, Robert Mueller, found no criminal conspiracy. Well, he couldn't find a criminal conspiracy because they couldn't charge the president. House Democrats are stumbling on anyway. Judiciary Chairman Nadler has decided he won't wait for authorization from the House. Mueller's investigation soured the congressman on asking for another one of those on his own authority. Nadler told CNN in August the 8th that his committee will undertake formal impeachment procedures aimed at voting articles of impeachment to the floor by the end of the year. The goal may be achieved as 7 of the 24 Judiciary Democrats now support impeachment. Only 4 more are needed to send the impeachment resolution to the full House. It gets dicey there, knowing the Democratic majority depends on 31 lawmakers who won't in Republican districts. The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, opposes impeachment, preferring to beat Trump at the polls in 2020. As of Wednesday, 127 of the 235 Democrats favor beginning the impeachment proceedings, along with 1 independent. Assuming no House vacancies occur, 208 votes would be needed to impeach Trump and send him to a trial in the Senate, where it would be impossible to imagine 67 lawmakers voting to convict. Nadler's decision to proceed will have ramifications. He will increasingly become the face of House Democrats. I guess it's no longer Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. More House Democrats will endorse impeachment. Gravitalization of forces inside the party will pull in that direction. Tom Steyer abandoned his multi-million-dollar impeachment campaign for a vanity candidacy for the Democratic nomination for president. Many of the Democratic Party's left wing are itching to take on traditional Democrats in primaries. Impeachment would be a litmus test. Nadler and his committee's work will further reduce awareness of the Democratic legislative agenda. What swing voters today describe what House Democrats have done. That attention deficit also distracts from the presidential candidates at a critical moment, years in, with early primaries, of course, coming up in Iowa, etc. The biggest problem with Democrats is pursuing the impeachment risks. Alienating swing voters. In the Quinnipiac poll, found that 62% of independents did not at that time, that was in July, favor impeachment. Congress should begin the process to impeach, while a June 16th Gallup poll found 51% of independents thought old DJ Trump should not be impeached and removed from office. Absent compelling new information, Nadler's machinations could endanger congressional Democrats in Republican-leaning districts. I think about Abigail Spangenberger here, but she'll get reelected. This is why only 2 Democratic representatives from districts Trump won: New Hampshire's Pappas and Illinois' Laura Underwood, back impeachment. Swing voters will ask why Democrats want to plunge America into a constitutional crisis. Well, it's not a constitutional crisis. The U.S. is already in a crisis, an economic crisis is coming. Impeachment requires broad bipartisan consensus. In this case, not even the Democrats are united on the courts. Well, what happened with the situation with Bill Clinton, the Republicans actually thought that they could damage Bill Clinton by obviously going for articles of impeachment. So they did impeach Bill Clinton, had a trial before the Senate. Democrats had a majority, so Uncle Bill is still there. So there we go. Some other information we've been having around here. This is out of the Midwest state of Minnesota. A former Republican that was defeated, Jason Lewis, announced he will challenge Tina Smith. She's a senator from Minnesota who won a special election. He was elected to the House in 2016 along with DJ Trump. Served a single term before losing re-election. Cast his campaign as a crusade for a list of conservative cultural touch points against radical political movements, he said. Anyway, today we're at the crossroads in Minnesota and across the country, not seen since the chaos and turmoil of the 60s. Yeah, that's stretching a bit there. Lewis said his campaign launched a video, private property, religious liberty, due process, pride of citizenship, the national anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance, even Betsy Ross's flag, are now seen as dispensable relics to radical political movements that appear to be gaining steam in corridors of power. Accused liberals of declaring border walls immoral, but not wanting to abolish immigration and customs. That's ICE, private insurance, healthcare insurance, welfare work requirements, air travel, fossil fuels, the internal combustion engine. Why? Capitalism itself, he claims here. Well, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines. I'm going to fight. Well, I suppose. Lewis focused on tying Smith to so-called squad. That is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, Ayanna Pressley from the Commonwealth, and Rashida Tlaib from Detroit. His announcement comes to Democrats giving up a war in Minnesota, while Republicans are keen on gaining ground after the narrow loss of DJ Trump, roughly 1.5 in 2016. Lewis won a suburban seat in 2016, but was ousted by 6 points in a nationwide election there. On his website, he taunts his votes for the GOP tax cut plan, efforts to slash regulations while in the House. He has an uphill battle to defeat Smith, who was appointed, of course, after Al Franken was unjustly removed. She won handily in the special election by 11 points. Kevin Martin, the chair of the Minnesota Democratic Farm Labor Party, pinned Lewis as Trump's hand-picked candidate in a statement and expressed confidence that Minnesota voters will reject his failed attempt at a second act. The Cook report handicaps rate to race as likely Democrat there. Mr. Cook is very wise to have done that particular situation. Let me just grab one more thing while we are here. This is Ava DuValier. This is from an interview with the Los Angeles Times. She is a director, a very good director there. Looks for joy in every project she has ever found it when they say us. So, she's out there, has always talked about creating things with joy and ingrained joy in the work, and if work is strong, she believes greatness will follow. on her set. She enables that spirit. Even in her bold 2014 Selma. Selma was a good film, requiring reenactment of riots, beatings, and murders. Duvalier says that the feeling of exaltation never dissipates. When they see us, a Netflix limited series depicting shocking events surrounding the Central Park Five, that was a case that DJ Trump challenged. In fact, he wanted a death penalty for the people in the Central Park Five. That's in 1989, and they were later acquitted. Period. And that ended that situation where it was there. And they, the Central Park Five, were portrayed as heroes, the other people as demons. In fact, the prosecutor in that case lost a book contract and is now in the trash can of history. And in this article, she kept her eyes on the prize. Not shining awards, but 16 Emmy nominations, including for limited series When They See Us. Duvalier wanted to interrogate criminal justice system plagued by institutional racism, showing how rights are stripped away from people even after they serve their sentences. It's like indentured servants, she said. She reiterated a prominent idea from the 2016 Emmy Award-winning documentary 13th. And let me move on down here with this update on her. I didn't have to serve anyone with When They See Us, other than the men I was trying to portray. By contrast, her last two features come with hefty build-in expectations. Selma had Dr. King at the center, A Wrinkle in Time, a beloved young adult novel. Madeline Laingo, I suppose is how you pronounce that name. And we'll get down to the latest. When she finished, well, they see us around Thanksgiving. Duvalier's highly trailer to its home, Los Angeles, because Netflix localizes its content throughout the world. She had to edit and turn 4 episodes by early March in order to make a 31st of May deadline. She and her team drove into Netflix mountain of data dope, and paying particular attention to the numbers that showed when viewers stopped watching the show if they weren't engaged. You have to respect science, and she's correct about that. And let me see. The point of this article is that she quit a recent production here. She recently signed a multi-year contract with Warner Brothers TV Group and says she is writing a lot of TV stuff. She's no longer working on the Netflix multi-part Prince documentary. She said she had created differences with the company after working for a year on the project. That does happen. I'm not sure who's working on Prince. Put a biography. Duvalier list all her films, noting she's a mom of 10. There, I need more room, she said, laughing, because I've got more kids coming. And this is Glenn Warp. Covers TV and film for the Los Angeles Times. Serves as a columnist. So that is that story of how creative activity occurs in Hollywood. The biggest problem we have with Hollywood is distribution, particularly as it applies to progressive films, and that's happened to Michael Moore and African Americans. We have to overcome that hurdle of how to distribute films, and of course to distribute films you have to be able to get into the cinemas, which are by and large owned by corporate entities more and more every day. There are independent cinemas around throughout the nation, and of course that's a trick. But for people of color, obviously streaming of the productions is the easiest way to do it. And of course Bill Cosby's attempt to buy NBC would have been a long ways in that situation there. And let me just roam along here a little bit more, and we'll get to Abigail Spangenberger. She is from Virginia. This was on the 19th. Jeannie Portnoy, I suppose is how she pronounced her name, writing in the Washington Post at the end of another long week in Congress. Abigail Spangenberger pours herself a cup of coffee and waits in her D.C. apartment for her family to arrive from their home in Richmond. Democratic liberals lashed out at moderates like her for approving the $4.6 billion emergency aid for the immigrants on the southern border. A deal, she said, did little to rein in the Trump administration's immigration policies. Mark Pocan of Wisconsin accused lawmakers like Spangenberger of being part of Child Abuse Caucus. Chief of Staff for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said their voice would enable a racist system on Facebook. Spangenberger was labeled too late and clueless. I doubt that very seriously, but reflecting last January's episode, Spangenberger said she learned a hard lesson she didn't anticipate in 2018 when she unseated David Brat. David Brat was a famous, was actually an economist that unseated the House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, who hadn't been heard from since, because he's out lobbying these days, helped Democrats to win the House majority. This week showed me that for some people, ideology matters more than putting food in the mouths of a child, and that was stunning to me. 8 months that she served, Spangenberger, that is. She came from a historic Republican district, but just 5 years ago replaced Eric Cantor with someone more conservative. She won office last year thanks to in large part to left-leaning groups like Liberal Women of Chesterfield County. Still, Spangenberger beat Brad by 2 points in a year when Democrats were motivated to send a message to Trump Republicans. Republicans are already targeting the district in preparation for the 2020 race. She steered through the political divisions within her swing district. Spangenberger is trying to navigate conflicts in her own party, disturbed by reports about migrant children sleeping on floors, unsanitary conditions, overcrowding holding cells without access to adequate help, and no help, not even use the term adequate. She sought out party leaders on the floor before a broad funding bill there. And just so we're clear, under no circumstances will we leave town while there are children being held in detention centers in conditions with no food, she said. As she told that to old Steny Hoyer and Sherry Butos, head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign. That's a mistake to appoint her. She's too right-wing. The House passed, the Senate passed the humanitarian aid bill, but Pelosi and liberals wanted legislation with stronger protection for immigrant children. Spangenberger and other moderates thought an attorney bill had little chance of getting by. Old man McConnell, National Republican Committee, routinely attacks Spangenberger for voting most of the time with Pelosi, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez referred to Cortez of New York. Well, DJ Trump is of New York also. From the borough there. The only Republican, Ramaz, let's see, Tanya Ramaz is running against her. Humanitarian aid package was just sort of a hard-fought accomplishment, she says. Let me just move on here. As a mother of three who worked on child abuse cases, she was a postal inspector. Spangenberg is particularly stunned by the suggestion that she backed a measure that would harm children. Well, she didn't do that. Back in her district last month, Burke gave a chance to reflect. She realized colleagues from the left flank of the party may not understand how her life experiences before she came to Congress shaped her perspective. I'm not going to, if I'm going to bridge this gap, because what I do every day in my district is to bridge the gap. Most people knew she had been a CIA official. She said, recanting the speech, but in her 20s, she worked in the law enforcement arm of the Postal Service on narcotics and child exploitation cases. She was a postal inspector type, as we call him. As the only Spanish speaker doing most of the rest, she said that she told them, I was the one walking in the door. I was the one yelling, put your hands up. I was the one dealing with crying children, taking them as we were taking their dads away. I was the one talking to crying wives, saying while we were arresting their spouse. She warned her colleagues to know she has experienced easing children through difficult moments and trying to act their way. And this is really something people need to understand. She did a good job of trying to appeal to all sides of the caucus by being very raw and personal and authentic. That is from Ron Queayudan of California. Showed people in the caucus were progressive, blue dog problem solvers. We shouldn't demoralize fellow Democrats on one vote. No doubt about that. That can be a mistake in itself. The other former CIA operative, Chris Hurd, is giving up the ghost. In other words, he's leaving to sponsor a bill that would beef up efforts to combat drug trafficking. He was smuggling. Well, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico to better understand conditions there. Well, these things happen because of one thing and one thing only: poverty. Period. You don't see people in rich districts smuggling people. Now, as far as so-called trafficking, well, that itself is a very, very confusing term out there, and it is meant to give some kind of petty, moralizing term to various things out there, and people many times misunderstand what is going on there. You apply that to Jeffrey Epstein and his situation there. Totally different situation, however, with him. There's obvious exploitation. But as the late Dr. Kwame Nkrumah would say, capitalism is a gentleman's method of exploitation there. So in other words, that is not an exact quote, but I remember that. So in other words, it is exploitation, and who the exploiter is, and that is a long, sound sort of argument there. The takeaway from this situation with Spangenberg is that in a system which we have now in the U.S. is a system, you have to look at it dialectically, whereas Spangenberg, as opposed to Britt, who was a nut. He was an economist, but literally a right-wing nut. Whereas the person that he replaced, or defeated, actually not replaced, was Eric Cantor, got more into his official role and thought he was going up in the party. Now he has departed the party, so to speak. In other words, we don't hear anything from him. But that is what happens, especially when you have a crisis in underlined capitalism itself, and that is what you have there. And of course, you have a magnified or amplified situation in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. very dangerous places. But some of the border cities to the U.S. are themselves very dangerous there. And some of the immigrants under this unjust rule of the Trump administration have to wait out their time to come back for an asylum hearing have decamped. They offer free bus service to the Pacific coast of Mexico, to the southern border, and they are taking those, and some people just simply give up and go back to Guatemala, Honduras, and that's, of course, Trump's ultimate goal. And this whole rough, inhuman treatment of immigrants, particularly children, is the idea to dissuade them. Now, this in itself has a lot of internal contradictions when the U.S. has a labor shortages in many parts of the U.S. Thus, they have to rely upon a labor that is quote-unquote cheap labor. As the situation happened a week or two back in Mississippi, massive raids there. Immigrants were arrested, some are released, but because of the sheer number in very small communities, that has caused economic distress to those communities. Families, of course, were broken up, which ultimately means that some of the families, the breadwinner, has moved on. They will be, of course, forced to move themselves, and some leave the country. So, in other words, a wicked cricket has arrived there. Let me just move along here, and I don't. No, that's not going to work. I think we amply covered DJ Trump and his retaliation against China, and retaliates in a trade war by escalating tariffs, demanding the American companies move. We talked about the near 700 point drop in the Dow, and how that is I was looking here. We covered the Amazon fire. This is just looking at the Washington Post here to make sure that we got everything we needed to get the relevant things here. They have an article here. Retaliates in trade war, escalating tariffs. Well, that's cut ties. This is in the Washington Post. Jeff Stein here writing, and Rachel Siegel on the 23rd of August demanding U.S. companies, this is DJ Trump, stop doing business with China. Combination of events nearly eclipsed a Twitter tirade in which he questioned. Now this is very interesting here. Whether Jerome Powell, he's chair of the Fed, was an enemy of the U.S. So Beijing has new tariffs on $75 billion worth of products. DJ Trump, writing on the 23rd, said the only question is who is the biggest enemy, Jay Powell or Chairman Xi. So that is his answer there. Who the enemies list? Well, he has a Nixon had the enemies list, but this character, DJ Trump, has an enemies highway. Period. That painting the Fed's lack of monetary easing, now that's quantitative easing we call it, is a great threat to American business. And of course he doesn't have the authority to force companies out of China. But the whole proposition of American companies ignoring 1.4, we used to say 1.2 billion customers, according to Myron Brilliant, Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said in a statement, escalating tension is not good for market stability, investing confidence. Confidence are American jobs. Anyway, the decline has been going on. That was 2.6. I think I gave it as 2.3. And the NASDAQ, 3% there. So there they go, downhill all the way, as one would say. I have no idea how the president thinks he can order companies to stop working in China. I'm baffled. That's Brian Rattle, I suppose. He's at the Conservative Manhattan Institute. He's been quoted a number of times as someone from that particular situation. The Manhattan Institute, that is. And so now, even the conservatives are nervous. China's economy has slowed to a 27-year low. Central banks, and we talked about this, Australia, Asia, and Europe have cut each interest rates. Yeah, they have, but they haven't really solved their problems. And J.P. Morgan Chase estimated American families would absorb $1,000 annual cost from all Chinese tariffs. That's after the 10% levy takes place. If they rise to 25%, it would be 15 there. So in other words, this is basically what is going on here with DJ Trump. Let's do the baseball scores here. I think we'll do the baseball scores. We have to do something. And maybe we can get the standings up. This is from last night. We're getting to a point in the baseball season that we have fewer and fewer games left. Nonetheless, the Nationals beat the Cubs in Wrigley Field 9-3. The Pirates were winners over the Reds in Pittsburgh 3-2. The Rays 7-1 in Camden Yard, Baltimore. And in 14, Atlanta 2-1 over the Mets in New York. Cleveland 4-1 over the hapless Royals in Cleveland. And in a slugfest, the Marlins 19-11 over the Phillies. In Florida, the Marlins had 14 hits, 1 error, and the Phillies 11 hits and 1 error. The Angels and Astros in Houston, 5-4 Astros. The Astros had 13 hits, 1 error, and the Angels 11 hits and no errors. The D-backs were in Milwaukee, Brewers 6-1. The Rangers and White Sox on the south side of Chicago, White Sox 8. The Tigers were in Minnesota, and they beat the Twins 9-6. Tigers had 17 hits, no errors, and the Twins 9 hits and no errors. The Rockies were in St. Louis, Cardinals 8-3 there. Cardinals 13 hits, no errors, and the Rockies 5 hits and 2 errors. You usually don't win a game like that. And the Sox, the Red Sox, were in San Diego. The Red Sox shut out the Padres 11-zip. The Sox had 14 hits, 1 error, and the Padres 5 hits and 3 errors. Dodgers and Yankees in Los Angeles. There's all Yankees there. They don't play each other very much at all. Yankees 10-2. Didi Gregorius hit a grand slam off of Renew, and he had the solo to help. That was a homer fest there. And finally, the Blue Jays were in Seattle 7-4. The Mariners there won that game. They had 12 hits, 1 error, and it was fairly even then for the hit category. And Toronto had 11 hits and 1 error there. The Yankees and Dodgers are meeting for the first time in nearly 3 years. They have faced each other in 11 World Series, but this marks the first ever regular season game meeting when both teams sported their respective leagues' best record. The Yankees have the best record in the American League, the Dodgers in the National League. Dave Roberts says it's fantastic for baseball, our players, for the fans. And you haven't got generations talking about these franchises. You've got the current cash of players and their brands, and the talent that we have on the field in this series, and it's going to be a lot of fun. That's from CNN. Adrian Gonzalez writing there. So this is one of the interesting things. One of my favorite places to play as a player, the Yankees manager Aaron Boone. You remember his dad playing on the excuse me, Dodgers Yankees this series. Every player, this is again from Gomez, this is ESPN incidentally, every player in the Dodgers lineup tonight will probably start playoff games of this year. A.J. Pollock, Justin Turner, Will Smith, Cody Bellinger, who won the for the most home runs last year. Max Muncy, Chris Taylor, Corey Seager, Kike Hernandez, and Renew. Well, he'll have to do better than he did last night, so we'll just we'll look at it. We had a very sad situation here out of Atlanta. I guess we'll go ahead and do this. Actually, it was a Boston situation. A woman kills her 2 children, and we'll just do it, I believe, for the Boston Globe. Otherwise, we'll go to the Atlanta Constitution and mop up the crime. She was an amazing writer, journalist, Boston University student, killed in a double suicide here. Very sad. Ephraim Edwards was set to return to Boston University next week, arriving back at school early to help first-year students adjust to life on campus. The body of the accomplished 20-year-old journalist was found along with her 24-year-old brother, Christopher, and a mother in Georgia. Double suicide there. Marsha Edwards shot her 2 children in her home and took her own life. These people were very well known. Ephraim Edwards had just finished an internship with an NBC station in New York. That's according to the Journal Constitution. Sad. Very, very sad in itself. Ephraim Edwards was... you were going to be one heck of an amazing journalist, as from an NBC correspondent named Alexander, Brittany Alexander. The world will truly miss you. Very unfortunate situation. She was a scholar there at Boston University. Called her death a great loss to the community, no doubt about that. Sad. Very, very sad story. And what more we can say? Service for Edwards are planned on Wednesday, the 28th, at Cascade United Methodist Church. That would be in Atlanta, Georgia. And I guess really we can't find anything else here. But evidently there is mental illness involved in this situation. Bodies were found inside an upscale townhouse. They're doing a welfare check. And we've already talked about the victims. And of course, the father was a doctor, and evidently so was the mother, who was an orthopedic, I believe is what it was. I was reading this. He is an orthopedic surgeon that served on the board of trustees of Morehouse College of Medicine. They have formerly served on the board of Grady Memorial Hospital. That's in Atlanta, Georgia. And the son was a digital content manager for an Atlanta firm, an entertainment office since 2018. And this Marsha Edwards had a medical equipment provider since July of 2015. And all 3 were members of the National Association of Black Journalists. Had not released in public. This is from the police just 2 days before their death. Photos on social media showed what appeared to be a happy, there's a picture of them here, happy mother-daughter trip to Italy. And there they are, there, Marsha Edwards and the daughter. Very strange, in Italy. Marsha Edwards' insignia account, she posted that she could not ask for better children, and added that she and her son went to Miami recently. So she went on these historic trips, which people do, with their children. Sad, and more sad are we. And we do not have any polling here. Nonetheless, this is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin Memorial broadcast booth on the 24th of August, 2019. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday morning quarterback. We also will have a numbers man. That's our macroeconomic presentation or episode this weekend. And remind you, we can be found on the RSS feed, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube. Contact depositories continue. Incidentally, we did a program on internet radio, which we're on, and the founder, the late Jerry Pippin, our broadcast partner there, and also it was called Internet Radio Podcast and more podcasts, proliferation of podcasts out there, what they mean. We do a little bit of a statistical part of podcasts so people understand where they are. And we're over the anointed recommended length, about 20 to 25 minutes. We're up about 50 minutes now. But we try to get the information out here. This is our sole objective here. And to do it in a somewhat timely manner, and at the same time be as scientific as we can in this thing called psephology, is what our goal is. We don't tell people how to vote here. We obviously tell people that we support Bernie Sanders of Vermont. But to whom you vote, that is your